Hello everybody, my name is Michael, and in today's video what we're going to be doing is this right here. So if that looks interesting to you, please carry on and watch the video. And also, just one more thing before we go. Please, if you enjoy the video, please don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. But with all that out of the way, let's carry on with the video.
Okay, so to start off with our zombie direwolf here, all I've done is I've given him a zenithal prime, and that's going on with black, and then spraying over top with white so you can catch a lot of those shadows in there. And the reason I've done this is so while I'm painting this up, I can keep in mind the areas that I want to be highlighting in that later on, because as you can see here, I'm using abandoned black here as the base coat, which is a black, a very, very dark color. It's basically going to completely cover all of these highlights and nice interesting areas that we've got here, but with our zenithal prime. But this is mainly for me, so I can keep a sort of a mental image as I'm going along and painting this up for areas, I should say, where I want to have those highlights and where to focus them and give me a better understanding of it as I'm painting it up. So not so much to take full effect of it like I do most of the time with using the highlights, but since we're giving a complete black base coat over it, it's more for my eye when I come to highlighting steps to just remind me as I'm painting it up. Then once we've painted up that base color, we've got some vampire red here, and this is what I'm going to be using for all the muscle underneath that you're going to be seeing. So as you can see along our zombie direwolf, these areas of skin that have been ripped off and exposed flesh, and this is where I'm going to be coming in with our vampire red, since we've got our zombie direwolf here, and you can see it's exposed ribs, very nicely detailed, probably a little bit hard to see on camera, since those ribs especially are super exposed right underneath the belly of the miniature. But what we want to do is give them a nice base coat, and we definitely want to do a few layers here, especially since we're using black. I sort of forgot about this while I was painting them up, and I went with the black over top, so I'm going to have to add on a few layers here. So if you want to save yourself a little bit of time, try and avoid these areas when you're doing the base coat so you don't have to go on with heaps and heaps of layers like I'm going to have to here. Then once we have all that flesh painted up on our zombie direwolf, what we're going to do is come in with some highlights for that fur. I'm going to be using basalt grey to do this. So a nice, it's a dark grey, but compared to our abandoned black we've got on here, very, very light. And what we want to do is be picking out those areas that we've seen in the zenithal highlight stage when I was priming it up, just keeping that in mind as I'm coming along and picking out those highlighted areas. And just a matter of coming in, and as you can see here, I'm being pretty rough and scratchy with this. I want to give it sort of like a fur-ish texture, so I've got my brush not so much in a fine point, sort of splayed out just a little bit so I can see some of the scratching areas as I'm placing it along here. Not trying to go for smooth, just carefully and roughly going across, leaving some scratch so I can hopefully give it some like fur textured on effect. Anyway, that's my plan anyway. I don't know how well it's going to go, but we'll see as we go along, and just keeping in mind that we want to be aiming for those areas where the sun is naturally going to hit. Okay, so now we have those highlights picked out. What I'm going to do now is come in with some khaki, and what we're going to be doing with this is we're going to use this as a base color for our bones on our zombie direwolf here. And you can see I've left some area for the eye sockets. It's got its ribs exposed, as well as its nice bone in its front paw there. There's a lot of sort of picking and choosing where you want this here. There's the clear obvious areas, but the areas like the face, it's a little bit hard to tell if they want a straight flesh or bone on there. So I'm decided to go with a little bit of each, really trying to make it look a little bit interesting with my painting here, and give me something else and something for you to visually look at as you're on the tabletop with this, so you can see the flesh and the bone exposed, really hoping to help amplify the miniature in some nice and easy ways as we're painting these areas up. But as you can see, I'm using a nice super fine tip brush, especially to get access at those ribs there, which are very, very delicate and very, very thin. So don't be afraid to spend a little bit of time on this. Then once you're happy with those areas of exposed bone on our zombie direwolf, what we're going to do now is come in with some deck tan. And what I'm going to be doing with this is I'm going to be using it to pick out the teeth of our direwolf, sort of an off creamish white colour, not quite white because I want to be saving that for the highlights of our teeth, so going with a very off-white beigeish colour to have that nice base tone in there. And of course, remembering to be careful where we're placing it and making sure that we get a nice paint job on those teeth, and making sure that we don't want to paint over anywhere that we've already painted up, since we've already spent a bit of time on those areas. But remember, just practice your brush control here. Switch to a nice finer tip brush if you need to, so you can really get in there and get a good base coat over those teeth. Then once we've painted up those teeth, what we're going to be doing now is going to come in with a wash, and we're going to be using Seraphim sepia to do this. And what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be giving this a wash over all of the exposed flesh areas, the bone and the teeth for this. So really trying to tie it all together in this very sort of muted wash color, but focusing a lot on those areas. Now, we're not focusing on our direwolf's base fur. We want to leave that alone, and we want to come in with a different wash for that. So it's just a matter of coming in, picking out those areas, and you can see immediately that it's going to enhance the bone and the flesh there and give it a really sort of nice muted look, so we can really get some depth into those areas with that wash. Then once we have that wash completely dry, we're going to come in with one more wash now, and this is going to be with dark tone, and this of course is a black wash, so Nollan oil is also a great alternative here. And what I'm going to be doing is this is where I'm going to be placing the wash over our base fur tone here. And what it's going to do is it's going to deepen those shadows in there, and it's going to add a bit of a darken filter over all of those highlighted areas, because I want to be adding another layer of highlights over top of that in a few moments. And I want to add, like I said, I'm trying to go for like a painted on fur, scraggly look with our model, and I wanted to come in with those highlights over top of the areas we've already highlighted to give that more scratchy appearance, like there's layers of fur and stuff on there. So the wash is mainly for that, as well as that Abandoned Black isn't the blackest black. It has a sort of a very light black, which is very strange to say, but it's lighter than a lot of the blacks I have, so there is room to apply a wash there and still get shadows in there. Then once we have that complete, what I'm going to be doing now is coming in with some skeleton bone, and as the name implies, we're going to be using it for our bony areas. And since I use khaki as the base tone and give it a wash over top, it's a lot very dark and really like deep bone color that you can see is sort of being like used and abused, and then coming in with this nice bright skeleton bone, especially compared to our khaki that's been washed here. It's got a very, very bright contrasting highlight, so it's going to really help sell the effect on the table, especially at a distance. And like I said, it's just a matter of going around, finding those areas where you've placed that bone, and just very carefully placing on those highlights. Of course, as you can see here, I'm using a very fine tip brush, since a lot of these areas are very thin with their details, since while we are painting bones on a miniature here, and I just want to be scraping the edges of that with the edge of my brush so you can get those highlights in those places where you need it to. Then once we have our bone highlighted up, what we're going to do now is come in with some ivory, and what I'm going to be doing with ivory is I'm just going to be using it to give a quick highlight to our teeth here, as you can see, nice and bright compared to that base coat that we've got on there with that wash, and they're going to really stick out, especially at a distance on the table, and that's what we want to achieve here. We've got a nice bright shining in that light. So it's just a matter of coming around and picking them out with the edge of the brush like we did in our step before with our bones. Then once we have that complete, what we're going to be doing now is coming in with some succubus red. And this is a pinkish red, and what we're going to be using this for is to, as the name implies, use the red. We want to use it over our red area. So we're going to be using this to be painting the highlights of our exposed flesh on our zombie direwolf here. And you can see there's some nice areas of muscle that we want to be picking out, as well as the little bits of exposed flesh where it's been torn apart, and that in there we want to be highlighting with our succubus red here, and our any sort of reddish pinkish color, or even maybe even straight pink if you want to apply a wash over top of that as well to bring it back down in color. I wanted to have I've got this great sort of in between color with our succubus red here that is going to be a perfect highlight for these areas. And like you can see again, very small areas I'm working with these exposed parts of our zombie direwolf, so switch to a smaller brush if you need to do something like this. Then once you have that complete, what we're going to do is come back in with our basalt grey now, and we're going to do the exact same thing we did before with highlighting in this exact same step, but being a bit more scratchier, and you can see I've even switched to a finer point brush, and being a bit more narrow with those points of highlight and going around, being a lot more scratchier. I'm sort of, especially when it comes to the flatter areas, I'm using the point a little bit more to get those scratchier textures and really bring out those areas, to give it like a shaggy, fur matted, sort of scraggly look that I'm trying to go for with our zombie direwolf. And it's just a matter of going around those areas and just being a little bit thinner than the areas we've already applied to bring that effect home, hopefully anyway. And then once you have that complete, I just want to add one more bit of detail. I'm going to be using jungle green to do this. And what I'm going to be doing is just very carefully with a very fine tip brush is come into those eye sockets and just dot in a little green eye. It's probably going to be very, very hard to see because it's quite a long way back there in a very shadowed area. But I wanted something that if you came up and close and personal with the miniature, you get to see these glowing eyes. You might even want to enhance that effect a little bit more, maybe put some like overglow in there and apply it to a bit more, but I just wanted those little beady points of light. You can use any color here, but I wanted that bright green, which is going to really separate it out from everything else on the miniature, since everything else is such muted colors. But with that, we're complete, so we can move on to some of those glamour shots and see how the miniature came out. So let's go and check that out, shall we?
And with all that complete, we have finally finished painting up our zombie direwolf from Reaper Miniatures. So I hope this video has been helpful for you guys, whether you want to follow along with what I did here, or you just want to use the videos for inspiration in painting up your own miniatures. But with all that said, guys, I'd like to thank you all for watching, and I can't wait to see you all in the next video.